It started the night I moved into the old boarding house on Ashgrove Lane, a place so forgotten that even the postman hesitated before dropping mail in the crooked box. I remember standing in my narrow rented room, the air thick with dust and faded perfume, when I first caught sight of the figure in the mirror. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the dim lamp on the dresser, but then it moved, and it moved closer. I had come to this town hoping to start over. I didn't have much left. A suitcase of clothes, a few books, and a head full of regrets that haunted me more than any ghost could. The landlady, Mrs. Callahan, an old woman with a raspy voice and eyes sharp as broken glass, warned me on the first night. "Some mirrors don't just reflect," she muttered, her gaze fixed on the chipped floorboards. "They remember." I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. The first night, the figure was barely visible, just an outline, a darker patch in the glass. But I still felt its presence, as if someone was standing just behind me, breathing so softly that it stirred the tiny hairs at the back of my neck. I turned around again and again, only to see nothing but peeling wallpaper and a single silent chair. Yet the shape in the mirror lingered, waiting. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake listening to the walls creak and shift, as if the house itself was breathing. When exhaustion finally took me, I dreamed of the mirror, of a hand pressing against the inside of the glass, fingertips pale and desperate, smearing a message I couldn't read. In the morning I tried to tell Mrs. Callahan. She only shook her head, her mouth pressed into a tight, bitter line. "Best to leave it alone," she said, then added almost in a whisper, "The house feeds on curiosity." I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. The first night, the figure was barely visible, just an outline, a darker patch in the glass. But I still felt its presence, as if someone was standing just behind me, breathing so softly that it stirred the tiny hairs at the back of my neck. I turned around again and again, only to see nothing but peeling wallpaper and a single, silent chair. Yet the shape in the mirror lingered, waiting. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, listening to the walls creak and shift, as if the house itself was breathing. When exhaustion finally took me, I dreamed of the mirror, of a hand pressing against the inside of the glass, fingertips pale and desperate, smearing a message I couldn't read. In the yellowed pages of a forgotten local chronicle, I found it. A brief mention of a young woman named Eleanor Carraway who had disappeared in the boarding house in 1923. Her body was never found. Some said she had simply run away. Others whispered that the mirrors in the house had kept her. That night, as rain battered the windows and wind howled through unseen cracks, I dared to speak to the figure. My voice trembled. "Who are you? What do you want?" She raised her hand, pressing it against the glass. A mirror image of my own hand, only hers was broken, twisted at the wrist, the skin bruised and torn. I gasped, pulling my hand back, but hers stayed, stuck in that silent plea. Sleep fled me entirely. I watched the mirror for hours, my eyes dry and burning, afraid to blink. When dawn finally crept in, the woman was gone, but a single word had appeared in the fogged glass. "Remember." What? I had no answer. The days blurred. I walked through town like a ghost myself, the locals avoiding my gaze. At night, the woman came closer still, until her breath seemed to fog the glass from the inside. I could see her eyes now, wild, terrified, and something else. Accusation.
Mrs. Callahan began to avoid me, her steps creaking on the stairs at odd hours. Once, I thought I heard her whisper outside my door, "It's almost time." The real horror began on the 7th night. I awoke to the sound of whispering, dozens of voices tangled together, seeping through the cracks of the old house. The figure in the mirror was no longer alone. Behind her stood others, shapes barely formed, shifting in the darkness, their mouths open in silent screams, and they were all looking at me. Panic gripped me. I ran to the mirror, pounding on the glass, shouting for them to stop, to leave me alone. The woman's hand met mine again. This time, the glass felt cold, wet, as if it was sweating fear. Then, for the first time, her mouth moved. No sound came, but I read the word on her lips, "Run." Behind me, the floorboards groaned, and I knew I wasn't alone in the room anymore.
I didn't dare turn around at first. The terror held me frozen, my eyes locked on the woman in the mirror, who still mouthed that single desperate word, "Run." A cold breath touched the back of my neck, and then the whispering rose, a dozen voices, all hissing over each other, drowning out my own heartbeat. Something in those whispers chilled my bones, as though they weren't meant to be heard by the living. Summoning every shred of courage, I spun around. The room was empty, or so it seemed. The chair was overturned, my suitcase spilled open on the floor, and the walls themselves seemed to ripple like heat rising from asphalt. But it wasn't heat, I felt. It was an impossible, suffocating cold. I fled. Down the creaking staircase, past the faded portraits of former tenants whose eyes seemed to follow me, out into the rain-slicked street. The door slammed behind me, the echo chasing me into the fog. I ran without knowing where to go, every shadow twisting into the shape of the woman from the mirror. My chest burned, and my legs felt like they carried more than my own weight, as if the fear itself had latched onto me, dragging me down. When I finally stopped gasping, I found myself back at the town's library. Even in the weak morning light, it felt safer than that room. The librarian, a thin man with spectacles that magnified his suspicious stare, barely looked up as I stumbled in. I knew what I had to do. I had to learn why Eleanor Carraway had chosen me, why she wouldn't let me go. I dug deeper into the town's history, finding old letters, faded police reports, and yellowed clippings. A pattern emerged. Over the decades, people who stayed in room 3, my room, either vanished without a trace or left town raving about figures in the mirror. One, a traveling salesman in 1951, had scrawled in a diary before disappearing, "She wants me to see. She won't stop until I see." The question burned in my mind. See what? That night, against all reason, I returned to the boarding house. Mrs. Callahan met me at the door, her lined face pale under the dim porch light. "You came back," she rasped, almost sadly. "I need to know," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, "Then you must watch. But remember, some truths don't set you free. They trap you." Inside, everything felt wrong. The air was heavy, smelling of damp wood and something older, sweeter, like rotting flowers. The whispers began the moment I stepped into room 3, though now they seemed clearer, words half-formed. See, remember, truth. I sat before the mirror, heart pounding, and waited. Minutes passed. Hours. The woman returned, closer than ever, her cracked lips trembling.
"Show me," I whispered. The glass darkened, as if night itself had pooled behind it. The woman stepped aside, and for the first time I saw beyond her a narrow corridor lined with more mirrors stretching into darkness. Shapes moved inside them, broken reflections of something monstrous, twisted copies of human forms. In each reflection, I saw Eleanor, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming, sometimes clawing at the glass as though trying to escape. And beside her, other faces, men, women, children, all lost, all trapped. My breath caught as in the deepest mirror I saw something worse. Myself. I stumbled back, heart racing, but the woman in the mirror raised her hand, beckoning. Against every instinct, I stepped closer. And suddenly, I wasn't looking into a reflection anymore. I was looking through. The room around me shifted. Wallpaper peeled away, revealing scorched wood. The air smelled of smoke and burnt hair. Shadows moved at the edge of vision, whispering in a language older than words. The woman pointed to the floor. Slowly, the boards became transparent, revealing a hidden space beneath the room. A narrow crawl space, packed with old trunks, broken furniture, and something worse. Bones. Tiny bones. Children. The realization slammed into me. Eleanor wasn't the monster. She was another victim, and so were the dozens of others trapped in the mirrors. Mrs. Callahan's voice came from behind me. They had to be kept quiet. The house hungers for secrets. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, candle in hand. Her shadow flickered wildly on the walls. "They were only children," I choked out. They were. But once you know, it's too late, she said, almost gently. The woman in the mirror reached out, her fingers pressing against the glass, and this time the glass gave way, rippling like water. "Come," she mouthed. I knew what she wanted. The truth wasn't meant to free me. It was an invitation to join them. I backed away, but the room shifted again. The shadows twisted around me, the whispers rising to a maddening roar. My reflection in the mirror wasn't moving with me anymore. It stayed still, staring back with eyes that weren't quite my own. And then, in my reflection, I saw a hand on my shoulder. I turned. There was nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was smiling. The smile in the mirror wasn't mine. It was stretched too wide, too cold, like something wearing my skin. I staggered back, heart pounding, as the reflection began to move on its own, tilting its head, studying me like prey. The whispers rose, twisting into words that felt both inside and outside my skull. "You see us now. You belong to us." I stumbled toward the door, desperate to get away, but the air thickened like syrup, slowing every movement. The candle in Mrs. Callahan's hand flickered violently, and for the first time I saw fear flash across her face. "You've seen too much," she whispered, almost pleading. "The house doesn't let go." The woman in the mirror stepped closer. Her mouth opened, but instead of a voice, there came a deafening hum, like bees trapped in glass. In that droning sound, I heard thousands of stories, thousands of secrets, all of them ending here.
I pressed my palms against the mirror, my breath fogging the cold surface. On the other side, my reflection was no longer smiling. It was screaming. In that moment, I understood. The house didn't want to kill me. It wanted to keep me. To trap my story among countless others so it could feed on my secrets for eternity. The woman's eyes locked with mine. In them, I saw not malice, but desperation. She hadn't been luring me. She had been warning me. I turned to Mrs. Callahan. "What is this place?" I demanded. "Why does it keep us?" Tears welled in her tired eyes. "It started long before me," she rasped. "This house is hungry. Every secret you tell here strengthens it. Every truth you see becomes its prisoner." I felt the pull growing stronger, like invisible hands dragging me toward the mirror. My reflection's mouth moved in sync with mine now, whispering, "Help me." But I didn't know who was asking, me or it. In desperation, I ran from the room, down the stairs that twisted under my feet, the hallway seeming longer than before. The portraits on the walls bled shadows, eyes weeping black streaks that dripped onto the floorboards. The front door was just ahead, but the whispers chased me, turning cruel. "Stay, stay. You can never leave." I slammed into the door, threw it open, and staggered out into the rain-soaked street. For the briefest moment, the night felt silent again. But then, I heard it, a single voice, soft and broken, from behind me. "Please, don't forget me." I turned back, and through the window of room 3, the woman stood at the mirror, her hand pressed to the glass. For the first time, I realized. She wasn't asking me to save her. She was asking me to remember. Because if no one remembered, the house would swallow her story completely. I fled into the fog, the rain plastering my clothes to my skin. The town felt deserted, as though everyone knew what lived in that boarding house and silently agreed to let it feast. Days passed before I could gather the strength to return to the library. I found one final newspaper clipping, tucked deep in the archives. Boarding house fire claims lives. Owner Eleanor Caraway among the dead. Building partially rebuilt years later under new ownership. Eleanor hadn't been a ghost trying to trap me. She had been the last person to try to stop the house before it claimed her too. I knew what I had to do. I began writing everything. The whispers, the mirrors, the hidden bones, Eleanor's warning. Each word felt like carving open a wound, but I kept going, driven by the single hope that stories once told become harder to erase. One night, as I finished, I glanced into the small mirror above my desk. For a heartbeat, I saw her behind me, Eleanor, her eyes sad but no longer pleading. She nodded, and then was gone. I thought it was over. But when I turned back to the page, fresh words had appeared beneath my final sentence. "We are still here." The truth didn't set me free. It kept me alive, but only as long as I kept telling it. And so, even now, I keep writing. Because if I ever stop,
if even one person forgets what waits in room 3. The house will come to remind us all.